What happens when a single mistake changes everything? When the ordinary becomes extraordinary in the blink of an eye? On a routine flight from Chicago to San Francisco, flight attendant Eliza Morgan made what seemed like a trivial error. Something so small, most passengers wouldn't even notice. But what began as a simple mix-up spiraled into a series of events that nobody, not the crew, not the passengers, and certainly not Eliza herself, could have possibly anticipated. How does a seasoned professional with over 10 years of experience find herself at the center of a situation that would test her limits? And why did passengers who boarded as strangers end up applauding her by the time the wheels touched down? By the end of this story, you'll witness how one woman's quick thinking turned potential disaster into something that would change lives forever. The question isn't whether mistakes happen. They always do. The question is, what happens next? Buckle up. This is one flight where following the safety instructions won't prepare you for what's coming. Flight AA 714 from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco was just another Thursday morning departure. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner gleamed under the terminal lights as passengers shuffled through the jet bridge, dragging their carry-ons and hopes for an uneventful journey across the country. Eliza Morgan had been with the airline for 12 years. At 38, she'd mastered the art of the perfect smile. Wide enough to seem genuine, but not so wide that it invited unnecessary conversation. Her uniform was impeccable as always. Navy blazer pressed to perfection, silk scarf knotted precisely, and not a strand of auburn hair out of place from her regulation bun. Coffee stain on 14C needs attention before boarding completes, she murmured into her headset as she greeted passengers at the door. Multitasking was second nature to her by now. Check the boarding pass, smile, direct, observe, report issues, all while appearing completely focused on each passenger as if they were the only person in her world. The cabin filled with the usual mix. Business people hammering last-minute emails before the door closed. Families attempting to contain excited children. Solo travelers already settling in with headphones. Normal. Routine. Predictable. Captain Hayes' voice crackled through her earpiece. Full flight today, Eliza. Ground says we're looking at some turbulence over the Rockies. Nothing serious. Copy that, she replied, checking her watch. 4 minutes behind schedule already. Small delays had a way of snowballing, and she'd seen 4-minute delays turn into hour-long nightmares too many times. As the final passengers boarded, Eliza noticed the manifest update on her tablet. Seat reassignments had come through at the last minute, a common occurrence, but always a potential source of confusion. Her eyes scanned the changes, noting a cluster of reassignments in the premium economy section. Something about an accommodation for a family that needed to sit together. The weight of fatigue pressed against her temples. She'd picked up an extra shift this week, covering for a colleague whose mother had been hospitalized. 3 back-to-back transcontinental flights in 4 days wasn't ideal, but the overtime pay would help with her sister's college textbooks this semester. Final boarding complete, announced the gate agent through her headset. Passenger count matches manifest. Eliza nodded to her colleague Jake, who was securing the overhead bins near the back of the plane. At 26, he was still enthusiastic about the job. Still believed that every in-flight announcement was vital communication rather than white noise to most passengers. As the aircraft door sealed with a pressurized thunk, Eliza felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, not nervousness, but the awareness that for the next 5 hours and 23 minutes, she was responsible for the safety and comfort of 247 souls in a metal tube hurling through the sky at 550 miles per hour. She began her pre-flight checks, moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. Everything was in order until she reached row 23. Her brow furrowed as she noticed the seating arrangement didn't match her updated manifest. According to her tablet, seats 23A through 23C should have been the Henderson family, parents, and child. Instead, 3 business travelers occupied the row, already engrossed in their devices. Eliza checked her tablet again, swiping to refresh the data. The information remained unchanged. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the man in 23A. "Are you Mr. Henderson?" He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "No, I'm Daniel Reeves." "This is my assigned seat." She nodded professionally while her mind raced through possibilities. Manifest error? Boarding pass mix-up. She'd encountered both before. "Of course, sir. Let me just verify something quickly." As she continued down the aisle, she spotted a family, likely the Hendersons, looking confused in row 29, holding boarding passes that indeed showed row 23. Eliza's heart sank. The last-minute seat reassignment hadn't been properly communicated. A simple error, normally easy to fix, but with a full flight and the pushback already delayed, it would require shuffling multiple passengers. Captain Hayes' voice came through again. "Control says we need to push back in the next 5 minutes or we lose our slot. What's our status back there?" Eliza hesitated for just a moment before responding. "All secure, almost ready for demonstration." She made a split-second decision. Handle the seating issue after takeoff. The Hendersons seemed settled enough where they were, and disrupting multiple rows right now would only delay departure further. What Eliza couldn't possibly know was that this small miscommunication, this tiny human error amid the complexities of modern air travel, would set in motion a chain of events that would make this routine flight anything but ordinary. As the engines hummed to life and the aircraft began to taxi, she felt an unusual tension in the air. Something was off today. Perhaps it was just her fatigue talking, or perhaps it was something more. A subconscious recognition that sometimes the smallest mistakes create the largest ripples. The seatbelt sign dings off 30 minutes after takeoff, and Eliza began preparations for the beverage service. The brief turbulence they'd encountered while climbing to cruising altitude had settled, but the knot in her stomach hadn't. She still needed to address the seating issue with the Hendersons. "I'll handle rows 15 through 30, she told Jake as they readied the carts. "I need to speak with a family in row 29. But before she could reach the Hendersons, the man in 23A, Daniel Reeves, flagged her down. "Excuse me," he said, his tone clipped. "I ordered a special meal when I booked this flight. Vegetarian? But I don't see it on your list." Eliza checked her tablet. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no note about a special meal request for seat 23A. "Because I'm not supposed to be in 23A, he replied, irritation building in his voice. "I was reassigned at the gate. I was originally in 17F. The pieces clicked into place. The cascading seat reassignments had disrupted the special meal assignments as well. A simple error now compounding. "I apologize for the confusion, sir. Let me see what we have available." As Eliza moved to check their vegetarian options, the drink cart blocked the narrow aisle. Jake was serving a passenger who seemed to be taking an extraordinarily long time deciding between tomato juice and cranberry juice. "Whenever you're ready," Daniel called after her, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's only been 12 hours since I've eaten." A ripple of discomfort spread through the cabin. Passengers looked up from their books and screens. By the time Eliza returned with a cobbled-together vegetarian option, Daniel had pulled out his laptop and was typing furiously. "Customer service will be hearing about this," he muttered as he accepted the plate. 2 rows behind him, Mrs. Henderson approached Eliza in the aisle. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "My husband has a severe nut allergy, and we always book seats at the front of the plane for faster emergency access. That's why we were supposed to be in row 23. Eliza felt the weight of her earlier decision pressing down on her. "I'm very sorry about the confusion. Let me check if we can still arrange." "Mom, I don't feel good," interrupted the Henderson child, a boy of about 7, his face suddenly pale. As if on cue, the plane hit an air pocket, causing a momentary drop. Drinks sloshed, passengers gasped, and the captain immediately switched on the seatbelt sign. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence." The timing couldn't have been worse. Eliza was now caught in the aisle between rows, a half-served beverage cart behind her, an increasingly queasy child in front of her, and a growing sense that this flight was rapidly departing from routine. "He gets motion sickness," Mrs. Henderson explained anxiously. "The medicine is in our carry-on, but it got gate-checked because our seats were changed, and we boarded in the last group." The plane jolted again. Eliza steadied herself against a seat back. "Jake," she called to her colleague, "can you get a sick bag to row 29? And alert the captain we have a passenger with a severe nut allergy seated far from the front." Jake nodded and hurried to comply, but as he moved down the aisle, a passenger from 31B called out, "Excuse me, there's water dripping from the overhead bin." Jake diverted to investigate, and Eliza found herself mentally juggling multiple escalating situations. The captain's voice crackled over her headset. "Eliza, we've got a routing change. Air traffic control is diverting us slightly north to avoid a weather system. Adds about 15 minutes to our flight time." Before she could respond, the Henderson boy lurched forward, and despite Eliza's quick reflexes with an air sickness bag, he missed. Several nearby passengers recoiled in disgust. Daniel Reeves from 23A stood up, despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. "This is unacceptable. First my meal, now this." "Sir, please return to your seat," Eliza said firmly, maintaining her professional demeanor while handing sanitizing wipes to Mrs. Henderson. "Not until I speak with the captain," Daniel insisted. "I'm an executive platinum member, and I've never experienced such poor service." Other passengers began to murmur. Some seemed annoyed at Daniel, others at the airline. The cabin's atmosphere shifted from routine indifference to collective tension. From the back of the plane, Jake called out, "Eliza, the leak is getting worse. I think we need to move these passengers." But there were no empty seats on the full flight, not without creating more disruption. As if sensing the mounting chaos, the plane encountered another patch of turbulence, more severe this time. A carry-on bag burst from an overhead bin that hadn't been properly secured, narrowly missing a passenger's head. "That's it," shouted Daniel, steadying himself against the seats. "I'm documenting all of this. This flight is a disaster." He pulled out his phone and began recording, panning across the cabin to capture the distressed child, the leaking overhead bin, and Eliza's increasingly strained expression. In 12 years of flying, Eliza had handled medical emergencies, aggressive passengers, and mechanical issues. But never had so many problems cascaded so quickly from such a simple initial error. The captain's voice came through her headset again, private this time. "Eliza, what the hell is going on back there? I'm getting alerts about a passenger standing during turbulence, a potential allergy situation, and a cabin disruption. Do we need to consider an unscheduled landing?" Eliza took a deep breath as the eyes of nearly 200 anxious passengers turned to her. Her decision in the next few moments would determine whether this flight recovered or spiraled further into chaos. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a troubling thought emerged. The passenger recording everything was no ordinary traveler. Something about Daniel Reeves seemed strangely familiar, and not in a comforting way. "Sir, I need you to put your phone away and return to your seat immediately." Eliza's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. The cabin fell silent as passengers sensed the shift in her demeanor. Daniel Reeves hesitated, camera still recording. "The public has a right to know how this airline treats its customers." "What the public has a right to," Eliza replied, taking a step toward him, "is a safe flight. You're endangering everyone on this aircraft by disobeying safety protocols during turbulence." Something in her unflinching gaze made Daniel lower his phone slightly. In that momentary standoff, recognition flickered across Eliza's face. "You're Daniel Reeves," she said quietly. From Air Traveler Review. Several passengers exchanged glances. Daniel's travel review blog had gained notoriety for its brutal takedowns of airlines and hospitality services. His exposes had cost people their jobs. A smug smile spread across his face. "So you've heard of me. Then you understand that your career is essentially over. This whole disaster will be online before we land." Eliza didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed her intercom button. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant speaking. We're experiencing several challenges at once, and I need your cooperation. First, all electronic devices must be stowed during turbulence. Second, we have a passenger with a severe allergy on board. And third, we're addressing a minor maintenance issue." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the cabin. "But right now, I need something from each of you. I need 3 minutes of calm." The simplicity of the request, and the quiet confidence with which she delivered it, seemed to reset the emotional temperature of the cabin. Even Daniel slowly returned to his seat, though he kept his phone in hand. Jake approached, lowering his voice. "The leak is contained for now. I've put an empty galley cart underneath it." "Good. Now I need you to get the first aid kit and find the EpiPen. Bring it to row 29, just in case." As Jake moved away, Eliza knelt beside the Henderson family. The boy still looked pale, but the worst had passed. "I'm very sorry about all of this," she said. "My name is Eliza Morgan, and I'm going to make this right. First, let's get you cleaned up and comfortable." Mrs. Henderson looked surprised at Eliza's directness. "Thank you. I'm Sarah. This is my husband Paul and our son Ethan." "Nice to meet you properly," Eliza smiled, before turning serious again. "Paul, I understand you have a severe nut allergy. We're bringing an EpiPen to have on hand, but I'd like to do more. With your permission, I'd like to make an announcement and create a nut-free zone in this section of the aircraft." Paul nodded gratefully. "That would be very helpful." Eliza stood and addressed the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a passenger with a severe nut allergy on board. For the remainder of our flight, I must ask that no nut products be consumed in rows 25 through 34. If you've already opened snacks containing nuts in these rows, please notify a flight attendant, and we'll provide an alternative." As passengers began complying, some even voluntarily stowing nut products despite sitting outside the designated rows, Eliza noticed Daniel Reeves watching her intently. She approached him directly. "Mr. Reeves, may I speak with you privately?" Surprised, he followed her to the galley area. "What you're witnessing isn't incompetence," she said once they were alone. "It's the reality of air travel. Systems fail. People make mistakes. Weather changes. What matters is how we respond." "That's a convenient excuse for poor service," he scoffed. "Is it?" Eliza challenged. "You're a journalist, aren't you? At least, that's what you call yourself. So tell me, are you more interested in creating clickbait disasters or reporting the truth?" Daniel blinked, taken aback by her directness. "Because right now," she continued, "you have an opportunity to witness and document how real professionals handle multiple crises simultaneously. That strikes me as a far more compelling story than another takedown piece." Before he could respond, the aircraft shuddered violently. The fasten seatbelt sign had remained illuminated, but now the captain's voice filled the cabin. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing moderate turbulence that may continue for the next 20 minutes. All passengers and cabin crew must remain seated with seatbelts fastened." Eliza and Daniel grabbed the nearest handholds as the plane bucked again. "We need to get back to our seats," she said. But as they turned to leave the galley, a loud metallic groan echoed through the cabin, followed by a sudden hissing sound. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling compartments. Gasps and cries erupted throughout the aircraft. Panic threatened to spread like wildfire. In that critical moment, Eliza didn't hesitate. She gripped the intercom handset. Everyone remained calm, her voice projected with remarkable steadiness. "This is a precautionary measure due to a possible cabin pressure fluctuation. Please place the oxygen mask over your nose and mouth, and breathe normally." She demonstrated with a nearby mask, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Secure your own mask before assisting others," she continued. "The cabin crew will check each row. Remember, this is standard procedure. There is no emergency." Despite her reassuring words, Eliza knew they were potentially facing a serious situation. The timing couldn't have been worse. Passengers already on edge, a sick child, an allergy risk, and now a possible pressurization issue. Captain Hayes' voice came through her earpiece, meant only for the crew. "Eliza, we're showing an indicator light for the rear cabin pressure valve. Engineering thinks it might be a false alarm, but we're diverting to Salt Lake City as a precaution. ETA 30 minutes. Keep everyone calm. We're beginning descent shortly." As Eliza moved to return to her jump seat, Daniel grabbed her arm. "Is this for real?" he asked, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine concern. Yes, she answered honestly. But we're trained for this. Now I need you to help me. Me? How? You have influence. Right now, people are watching you. If you panic, they panic. If you stay calm, they might too. So put your mask on, return to your seat, and show them how it's done. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, respect, perhaps, or simply the recognition that this was no longer about a negative review but potentially about lives. He nodded and moved back toward his seat, oxygen mask in place, his demeanor noticeably composed. As Eliza made her way through the cabin, checking masks and offering reassurance, she realized something extraordinary was happening. Passengers were helping one another. The businessman from 17B was assisting an elderly woman with her mask. A college student was calming a frightened child. Even the Hendersons, despite their ordeal, were calmly following procedures. What had begun as a cascade of errors and misfortunes had somehow transformed into a demonstration of humanity at its best, all held together by the steady presence of a flight attendant who refused to let chaos win. And Daniel Reeves, travel industry critic and professional cynic, was watching it all with newfound appreciation, his phone now tucked away in his pocket, forgotten in the face of something far more significant than a viral story. The descent into Salt Lake City International Airport was tense but controlled. Captain Hayes executed a textbook landing, the wheels touching down with barely a bump despite the aircraft's compromised systems. As the plane taxied to the gate, the relief in the cabin was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came through the speakers, "welcome to Salt Lake City. I want to personally thank you for your cooperation during our unexpected situation. Ground crews and maintenance personnel are standing by. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." Eliza moved through the cabin, checking on passengers and collecting oxygen masks that had been used. When she reached the Hendersons, little Ethan looked much better. His color returned to normal. "How are you feeling?" she asked him. "Better," he replied. "That was scary, but also kind of cool. We didn't even finish our movie." His innocent perspective brought a smile to Eliza's face. "I'm glad you're feeling better. And don't worry about the movie. I think you just lived through something much more interesting." Sarah Henderson touched Eliza's arm. "Thank you for taking care of us. When everything started going wrong, I was so angry about the seats. Now it seems so trivial." "Not trivial," Eliza corrected gently. "Your concerns were valid. I should have addressed the seating issue properly before takeoff." Paul Henderson shook his head. "You handled everything amazingly well. I can't imagine juggling so many problems at once." As the aircraft finally came to a stop at the gate, Captain Hayes made one more announcement. "Folks, we'll be deplaning shortly. The good news is that our maintenance team has already identified the issue. A faulty pressure sensor triggered our systems. After inspection, they'll determine whether we continue on this aircraft or transfer to another for our journey to San Francisco. Either way, we'll have you on your way as soon as possible." While passengers gathered their belongings, Eliza noticed Daniel Reeves approaching her. His earlier hostility had vanished, replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Ms. Morgan," he began, "I owe you an apology." Eliza raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I came into this flight looking for problems," he continued. "It's become a habit in my line of work, finding fault, exposing weaknesses. But today I witnessed something different." "Just doing my job, Mr. Reeves." "No," he shook his head. "It was more than that. When everything went wrong, and let's be honest, everything did go wrong, you didn't just manage the situation. You transformed it." Other passengers had begun to listen, nodding in agreement. "The mistake with the seating assignment," Daniel continued, "that was just the beginning. But instead of watching a disaster unfold, I watched a masterclass in crisis management." A woman from row 31 chimed in. "She's right. I fly weekly for business, and I've never seen cabin crew handle pressure like that." "The way you spoke to us," added another passenger, "you made us feel like we were part of the solution, not just victims of circumstance." As passengers began to deplane, many stopped to thank Eliza personally. Some even took photos with her. The atmosphere had completely transformed from the tension-filled cabin of hours earlier. Jake approached, grinning. "You got quite the fan club forming." "They just needed someone to stay calm," Eliza replied modestly. "It was more than that, and you know it," Jake insisted. "You turned a potential disaster into a shared experience that brought out the best in everyone." As the last passengers filed out, Daniel Reeves lingered behind. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told Eliza, "about whether I want to create clickbait or report the truth." "And," she prompted, "I think there's a more important story here than flight attendant makes mistake. Something about human resilience, leadership under pressure, the way strangers can become a community in moments of crisis." Eliza smiled. "That sounds like something worth reading." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I've built my career on negativity, finding what's wrong with travel experiences. But today I witnessed something genuinely right." Before Eliza could respond, Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit. A tall, distinguished man in his 50s. He approached them with an extended hand. "Ms. Morgan, that was some of the finest cabin management I've witnessed in 30 years of flying. When multiple systems were failing, you were the one system that didn't." The compliment brought a flush to Eliza's cheeks. "Thank you, Captain. Just doing what needed to be done. Headquarters is already aware of the situation," he continued. "The preliminary report mentions your exceptional handling of the events. They're particularly impressed that we had no passenger panic despite the oxygen deployment." Daniel stepped forward. "Captain, if I may, I'm Daniel Reeves from Air Traveler Review." The captain's expression tightened slightly. "I'm familiar with your work, Mr. Reeves. Then you should know I'm planning to write about today's flight, but perhaps not the story you're expecting." 2 hours later, as passengers reboarded a replacement aircraft bound for San Francisco, the mood was remarkably different. People who had been strangers now chatted like old friends, united by their shared experience. The Hendersons had been properly seated at the front of the cabin, with Paul's allergy clearly noted in the system. When Eliza boarded to resume her duties, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. "Welcome aboard," she smiled, momentarily overwhelmed by the response. "Thank you, but please, this is unnecessary." "On the contrary," came Daniel's voice from his seat, "it's absolutely necessary. Today started with a small error and became something none of us will forget." As the flight continued to San Francisco without further incident, Eliza found moments to reflect on the day's events. One small mistake, a seating assignment overlooked in the rush of departure, had cascaded into a near catastrophe. Yet somehow it had also created something beautiful. Strangers connecting, people rising to challenges, humanity at its best. When they finally landed in San Francisco, passengers lingered longer than usual, exchanging contact information and taking group photos. Daniel approached Eliza one last time. "My article goes live tomorrow," he said, handing her his business card. "I think you'll find it does justice to what happened today." "I'm not worried about the article, Mr. Reeves," she replied honestly. "Daniel, please. And you should be just a little worried," he said with a wink. "After all, it might make you famous." 1 week later, Daniel's article, Above and Beyond, How a Flight Attendant's Error Revealed the Best of Humanity at 30,000 Feet, went viral. Rather than focusing on the mistake, it celebrated the remarkable way Eliza had transformed cascading problems into a community-building experience. The airline, recognizing a public relations opportunity, featured Eliza in their training materials. Her approach to the crisis became a case study in flight attendant schools across the country. But for Eliza, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the recognition or even the promotion she received. It was the reminder that in a world of sophisticated technology and complex systems, the most reliable system remains human resilience. And sometimes, it takes a mistake to reveal just how remarkable that resilience can be. So what would you have done in Eliza's situation? When everything seems to be going wrong, would you have stayed calm under pressure or buckled under the weight of cascading problems? Let us know in the comments below. We all make mistakes. It's part of being human. But it's how we respond to those mistakes that truly defines us. Eliza's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges can become our finest moments if we approach them with grace, composure, and leadership. Have you ever witnessed someone turn a potential disaster into a triumph? Or perhaps you've been that person yourself, the one who kept it together when everything was falling apart. We'd love to hear your stories of everyday heroism and resilience. And speaking of resilience, flight attendants deal with incredible challenges every day, often without recognition. If you've had a flight attendant go above and beyond for you, share that experience in the comments. Let's celebrate these unsung heroes of the skies. Did this story resonate with you? If so, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Remember, we post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, bringing you the most compelling real-life dramas from around the world. Make sure you've turned on notifications so you never miss an upload. What kind of stories would you like to see next? A doctor's split-second decision that saved a life? A teacher who transformed a struggling classroom? A stranger's act of kindness that changed someone's world? We're taking your suggestions seriously, so let us know what moves you. For those who stayed with us until the end of this video, here's a special bonus. Next week, we'll be sharing an exclusive interview with a real-life flight attendant with over 20 years of experience. She'll be revealing insider stories and professional tips that most passengers never hear about. You won't want to miss it. And for our viewers who work in customer service or high-pressure environments, whether you're a flight attendant, a nurse, a teacher, or anyone who deals with the public, we see you, we appreciate you, and this video is dedicated to you. Your work matters more than you know. Until next time, remember that our greatest mistakes often lead to our most meaningful moments, if we have the courage to turn challenges into opportunities. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it's not about the errors we make, but how we recover from them that counts. See you in the next video.